The Iowa, is it a primary or is it a caucus for the Republicans? It's caucus. And that's going to be essentially, it's not going to be quite nail in the coffin time because there is a desperate attempt to make it seem like Nikki Haley has some type of campaign momentum. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of it has to do with her being VP. That the Republican establishment desperately wants someone there to, at least, essentially spy on Donald Trump. Honestly, I think that's a big part of it. Big babysitter. Let's just look into some of this polling and then we'll get to some of the Nikki. Well, let's get to this Nikki Haley thing. Here's Nikki Haley. She had a tough time over the break. Trying to sort of thread this needle between how do I appeal to 95% of the Republican voters who are all bat crap crazy. Right. But also sound like I'm not a lunatic to the establishment media because that is my entire brand, my brand proposition value or whatever it is, core brand proposition. So here she is. She is at a town hall in Berlin, New Hampshire. She expects not to win Iowa from, and we're only talking about Ron DeSantis here, but really New Hampshire is where she really wants to, I think, make her stand.
Open primaries, more moderate state.
Exactly. And but here she is trying to not be a Republican lunatic.
Please, what was the cause of the United States Civil War?
Well, don't come with an easy question or anything. I mean, I think the cause of the Civil War was basically...
How is that not the easiest question in the world?
That's the amazing thing that she actually comes right out and says, I'm terribly nervous about answering this question.
Exactly. And you can hear her pause and her voice shake. That's the thing that made me laugh about this, but you can start over.
She was a diplomat to the UN, and this is a hard question. Can you please explain the reason we got into a civil war 160 years ago? Is it really that sensitive?
Can you explain what color grass is and what color the sky is?
Well, I mean, that's trickier
really tough
because
question.
You need to tell me what month it is. Because if you're in the Northeast and it's like, say, August, it's brown.
I guess you're right. That's a trickier question.
It is a trickier question, but all right, go ahead.
Please, what was the cause of the United States Civil War?
Well, don't come with an easy question or anything. I mean, I think the cause of the Civil War was basically how government was going to run, the freedoms and what people could and couldn't do.
To do what?
What do you think the cause of the Civil War was? I'm sorry?
I'm not running for president. I wanted to see your view on the cause of the Civil War.
I mean, I think it always comes down to the role of government. We need to have capitalism. We need to have economic freedom. We need to make sure that we do all things so that individuals have the liberties so that they can have freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom to do or be anything they want to be without government getting in the way.
In the year 2023, it's astonishing to me that you answer that question without mentioning the word slavery.
What do you want me to say about slavery?
You answered my question. Thank you.
Next question.
He says you answered my question.
Okay, so he says it's amazing to me that in the year 2023, and we cut out part of her answer, right? I mean, that's a clip of her answer. It shortened it. I don't know how long it shortened it, but I mean, does it matter? How do you get through that question and have the guy say, it's amazing to me in 2023 that you can't say that the Civil War was about slavery? She didn't even put it down on the list. Never mind the top of the list. She didn't even put it on the list. And she's like, what do you want me to say about slavery?
It is amazing because one, in the sequencing of the primaries, right? She thinks her best shot is in New Hampshire. But in New Hampshire, that's not going to necessarily fly with like the big kind of independent coalition. I mean, I remember covering the primary before COVID hit in 2020, and I went to a Biden event, and there were a lot of moderate Republicans there just checking him out to speak, because it's just a different kind of political environment in New Hampshire for this primary process. And so that guy's probably someone who thinks of himself as an independent, or maybe somebody who might consider somebody else. And it's a northern state. They're not going to have the same reaction there. So she was caught in a bind between what we always talk about, the Republican base that really drives the engine of things, and the practical realities of her candidacy and how she can get any kind of toehold in, being the number 2 in this race. It was funny.
On Wednesday, she is in, I've been corrected, it's Berlin, New Hampshire.
Sorry.
And now, on Thursday of last week, she's in North Conway, New Hampshire, and she is trying to dig herself out of a little bit of a hole. Now, of course, here she's at a place where they have books, so she's got to be extra careful about what she says about major historical events. Here we go.
Last night I was asked about the Civil War and what I think of the Civil War, what was the cause of the Civil War. Of course the Civil War was about slavery. We know that. That's unquestioned, always the case. We know the Civil War was about slavery. But it was also more than that. It was about the freedoms of every individual. It was about the role of government. For 80 years, America had the decision and the moral question of whether slavery was a good thing and whether government, economically, culturally, any other reasons, had a role to play in that. By the grace of God, we did the right thing and slavery is no more. But the lessons of what that bigger issue with the Civil War are is that let's not forget what came out of that, which is government's role, individual liberties, freedom for every single person, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom to do and be anything you want to be without anyone or government getting in your way. That should be the goal of what we always try and take away from.
Okay. This is astonishing. So what happens is somebody says, Nikki, it looks bad that you didn't even mention slavery as a cause of the war. Not the top cause, not the last cause, not the middle cause, none of the cause. So go out there and try and fashion something. And so she goes out there and she says, of course, slavery was such a part of the Civil War that I didn't even need to include it in my answer before.
It's actually boring to mention it.
So obviously, and the thing is, they know it's out there. So this corrective is for the people who aren't going to follow up on this stuff anyways. But the amazing thing about this is that, no, the Second Amendment did not come out of the wake of the Civil War. That actually didn't. Neither did the First Amendment.
Right.
Those existed prior to the Civil War. What came out of the Civil War were the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments that were explicitly about a more activist government role, not less.
Yeah.
Explicitly about actually race-based solutions to changing the dynamic in the country. It was specifically about more aggressive involvement by the government in establishing things like public schools, et cetera, et cetera. And the amazing thing about this is it was Republicans who did it. She could have touted the fact that it was Republicans who did it.
Right.
And what is the government's role in securing individual rights? It's, should they fight a war against the slave-owning class that basically started the conflict to secure its own freedoms, as you say?
Yeah.
But it's funny, you look at DeSantis is yikes. It looks like Nikki Haley has some problems with American history. Not that difficult to identify identify and acknowledge the role slavery played in the Civil War. Donald Trump also saying, "Psst, Nikki, the answer is slavery, period." It's very funny to watch these guys who are who basically have the neo-Confederate or crypto-Confederate vote in hand also preen about that.
Hey, DeSantis instituted a curriculum in Florida that basically said what her first answer was. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, how many times have you heard Donald Trump talk about like the 1776 project versus the evil 1619 project or whatever? I like when she says it's primarily about the freedom of the individuals. Yeah, I mean, like mostly about the freedom of black people. Like from chattel slavery, but then she tries
as compared to the freedom of slave owners.
It's the ability for slave owners to own those people. So those things are a little bit in contradiction when we're talking about freedoms. It's the individual freedom for everybody. On one side, you have the individual freedom of people to not be property. On the other side, you have the individual freedom of people to make them property. And the Civil War was about that, about freedom for everybody to do what they wanted. Now, Nikki, unfortunately, those two things are a bit incompatible.
But the reason why we show this is to show how really nuts the base of the Republican Party is. And the base, by the base, I mean, like it's a bigger base, really, if you define it as people who are going to participate in the primaries, in the level of enthusiasm on the Republican side. Because to have to walk a tightrope that causes you not to mention the word slavery when you answer the question as to what was the Civil War about.
Right.
And even like all the people say, well, slavery was a second order issue. It was about economics. She couldn't even say that. Which of course is total BS, but she couldn't even say the word slavery. Yeah. For fear.
It's just about ideas.
For fear of being labeled some type of like, liberal or,
bit woke.
Wokist or whatever it is. It's fascinating. Let's play one more clip involving Nikki Haley. And then we'll move on to these poll numbers that aren't terribly encouraging for Joe Biden. Here is Steve Bannon, the former Trump advisor, probably current Trump advisor, with the white supremacy, would you call him, Jack Posobiec? Very sort of, very excited about whiteness. Also, that guy seems to have straightened up his life after he was found on Bumble cheating on his friend.
I wonder how that FBI investigation into who was impersonating him on Bumble.
Yeah, that was weird. I never heard it. I never got an update on that.
The deep state is not going to look into it.
It's probably Fauci.
You should also say, this is the guy, I guess, that Cernovich hired to go through my tweets back in the day and get me fired. That didn't work
Thanks
out
for that.
But now he's wearing a sport coat. And he's with Steve Bannon, and they are talking about Nikki Haley's run, essentially, for vice president. And here is Steve Bannon.
Forget Republican and Democrat. Those are, if you're thinking in those terms, you're thinking of old politics. This is populist nationalism versus elite globalism. And if you see Republicans that are not in our camp, they're by and large elite globalists. The Mitt Romneys of the world, the people in the Senate, right? The
Nikki
Kevin McCarthy,
Haley.
neocon Nikki, neoliberal. No. Listen, Nikki Haley's biggest donors right now are some of the most radical anti-Trump Democrats.
What did you think?
Reid Hoffman.
What did you think when Jamie Dimon came out at the New York Times summit?
She'd be a great president.
And said she'd be a great president, and we've all got to back her.
One of the fights we're going to have, a big fight, will take place in the spring, will be they're going to try to force Nikki on the ticket. They say Trump needs a woman, Nikki on the ticket. She balances things, and she can bring together that 15% of never-Trumpers in the Republican Party. We're going to have that fight. If Nikki Haley is in this administration in any capacity, it will fail. She's a viper. She's a viper, and once she gets in there, she'll try to run it as prime minister. She'll try to be Dick Cheney. Her to Trump will be just like Dick Cheney to Bush. That's what she'll
But
try
Steve,
to
I have
do.
to ask you, because Richard Barris issued a warning about this, a very specific warning, and he went even further. Barris's warning was this. He said, you put her in as vice president, and they will find someone to Lee Harvey Oswald Trump, get him out of there, and make her the president in his stead. And he said if she becomes VP, that guarantees they're going to take a shot at him.
I got to tell you, we have to put on the table, because Robert Kagan, one of the senior most thinkers in the neocon, vertical, the husband.
There's a lot of columnists at the Washington Post.
Right.
Robert Kagan.
Yeah, it looks like Bannon didn't want to. I don't want to subscribe to the that she's being put on as a way of setting Trump up for assassination.
For Lee Harvey Oswaldization. The Viper Haley thing. Look, I don't like Nikki Haley. I do think her positions on war are horrendous and terrifying. That she could maybe be the next president. But the idea that she represents a singular sort of threat that they should all get behind. It's like. She's just useful as an icon for you, I think, basically, because the idea that Trump's going to get in office and not hire hundreds of Nikki Haleys to staff his administration. That's what he did the first time, and that's what he'll do the next time.
He's calling him a neocon. I mean, John Bolton was in the administration.
Exactly.
The number one person I think of when I think of neoconservative is John Bolton. It's all about aesthetics, right? And I guess she's just a little too close to the Republican establishment, so she's a globalist.
I also think there may be other aesthetics that might be an issue for them on the ticket. I mean, because it becomes a lot harder. Yeah, it becomes a lot harder to. Nikki Haley runs into this problem, but it becomes a lot harder to run an anti. Black and brown, anti-immigrant, they're replacing us campaign. If you literally have a second-generation immigrant who's brown in office, regardless of how much she runs from that.
I mean, apparently she once listed herself as white on her voter registration I saw over the weekend. It's a little bit that's what she's trying to.
Yeah. But again, it's an aesthetics.
Yes.
And, Donald Trump up there, I think they're afraid that will, because I don't think her existence on a ticket is enough for, to the extent that there are anti-Trumpers out there in the Republican Party to go oh, well, at least Nikki Haley's there. She'll be able to corral him any more than, Mike Pence was. And let's talk about this, because there's new polling out from Suffolk and USA Today, which I think really captures, and it's early, obviously, but, we keep saying it's early, and then it gets later.
These are maybe the worst numbers I've seen yet for Biden.
They're the worst numbers, but I think what they show is the real dynamic that is going on here. There is in this poll, I got it right here. I got two different polls here. USA Today, Suffolk University poll. Biden's failures to consolidate support in key parts of the coalition that elected him in 2020 has left him narrowly trailing Trump, the likely Republican nominee, 39 to 37%. 39 to 37. That's you've got an extent of over 20, almost 25% of the population is not weighed in on that, and that's because 17% support an unnamed third-party candidate. Now, 39-37% is essentially a tie. Mm-hmm. And, in terms of the margin of error. But what's interesting here is that Biden has lost support, but he has not lost it to Trump. He has lost it, at least in this poll, to unnamed third-party candidates. When 7 candidates are specified by name, I don't have all those 7 in front of me, and I imagine they're not all going to be on the ballot in different places. Trump lead inches up another 3 percentage points, or I should say up to 3 percentage points from 2 to 37 to 34%. with Robert F. Kennedy at the top of the third party candidates at 10%. And so what you're looking at is Biden bleeding support not to Trump, but to third party candidates. Now, my sense is generically that is not great news for Biden, but it's relatively good news, because to lose the support to Trump would be a lot harder of a fight, it seems to me, than to lose it to a third party candidate. Because if they're voting for a third party candidate, they don't like Trump either. And the closer you get to the elections, when you start to see some numbers go up on, in a general election in terms of polling, I think it becomes clear to those people who are voting for that third party candidate that they will be electing Trump in that instance. Because I don't think there's many people defecting from Trump at this point. Trump's voters are there.
Yeah.
They are as psyched as they've ever been. In fact, I think there is an enthusiasm, and I'm not quite clear what the enthusiasm, I need to see how that question is. In the poll, 44% of Trump supporters describe themselves as a 10 on a thermometer measuring enthusiasm. Now, I don't know if that means, are you enthused about voting for this person, or are you enthused about voting in the election and you're voting for Trump? Among Biden supporters, fewer than half that number, 18%, calls them a 10. But it's not inconceivable to me that there's people who are a lot more enthused about voting against Trump than they are enthused about voting for Biden. And it doesn't, at the end of the day, if I vote for Biden, it doesn't matter if I do it with one hand holding my nose or if I'm doing it with a Biden flag in the other hand. The point is, who am I going to vote for when I get there? But I think what you glean from this is it is not Trump who is losing support as much to third party candidates as Joe Biden is. And I think as we get closer to that election, it is an easier sell to people. Like, understand, Bobby Kennedy is not going to be the next president at 10%.
Yeah.
He's not, that's not going to happen.
But this plays into also, just to add to your point, what we said earlier, that Trump's been as invisible as he's been in a long time in the public eye, with everything going on in Gaza and with, him not participating in the Republican debates, for example. So I think these numbers will narrow once he has to be out there more, but it still is. It's immensely concerning.
Nikki Haley, 40 minutes ago, with only 3 candidates qualifying for the CNN debate, it's time for Donald Trump to show up. As the debate stage continues to shrink, it's getting harder for Donald Trump to hide.
It's absolutely
Who was
not
the
in his
third
interest.
candidate?
Yeah.
Who was it? Who were the third candidates?
It's him, her, DeSantis, and Trump is what she said. Oh.
No.
Oh, a third candidate.
Oh, Trump being
it?
that person.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
People who have qualified are her, DeSantis, and Trump. No one
All right,
else has.
fair enough.
Yeah.
Save us from the DeSantis-Haley face-off.
Yeah.
Now, this is, according to this poll, Biden now claims the support of just 63% of black voters, a precipitous decline from the 87% he carried in 2020. I find it hard to believe. And again, Trump's black voter numbers has stayed completely static. So these voters are basically saying, at this point, I'm not voting for Biden. I may vote for a third party, but they're also saying I'm not going to vote for Trump. I find it hard to believe that of that 87 to 63% drop, 24 percentage points, that a lot of those people aren't going to come back. And actually, when you get closer to the election, aren't going to vote for Biden. Frankly.
And can I ask, are these likely voters?
This is 1,000 people, likely voters.
Right.
Again, we don't know how they're determining that. But these are, you take these polls as part of a larger trend. There's nothing in this poll that is, although that number seems big to me, again, the 24% drop. There's nothing in these polls that are wildly different from the trends that we've been seeing in other places. But again, I think it's, we'll see.
The thing that alarmed me is that the Hispanic vote numbers, that's pretty precipitous. And the voters under 35, that's right below that.
Yeah, supposedly Trump now leads them 37 to 33%. Now, again, that leaves 30% of them either I don't know or voting for a third party. And it's, again, hard for me to imagine that people are more likely to defect from that third party or the I don't know to Joe Biden, it seems to me, than to Donald Trump. But maybe that's aspirational on my part. But that is my sense.
This backs the other polls that we'd seen about the frustration from voters under 35 about the lack of student debt. Biden essentially, in the piecemeal approach he's had when the Supreme Court shot down his student debt cancellation, has said, has canceled student debt, but it's largely for people who've been on time with their payments and have been paying for 20 years. That's when Biden deems you're worthy of cancellation. And it's a joke. And so that's why you're not seeing good numbers on that with younger voters, and he needs to address that quickly. And then I don't understand a little bit why some of these pollsters aren't being a bit more proactive in asking questions about how Biden's Israel support is affecting their enthusiasm, because I'm still not seeing much. It's mostly about abortion and student debt. I'm sure that those are the main drivers, but still curious about those numbers.
There was a poll that showed that more Americans think that foreign policy should be a top priority for the U.S. And 5% of the population says that the Israeli-Hamas war was mentioned, I should say, in issues that they cared about. So there's, I would imagine a small number of people who are going to be voting based upon that. But again, and this is the thing to keep in mind, Joe Biden won by a combined 40 some odd thousand votes over the course of 3 states. This is not about, it's very likely that Joe Biden is going to get 5, 6, 10 million more votes than Donald Trump in this election. And it's still very possible he could lose by 40,000 votes amongst 3, 4, 5 states, maybe, in terms of the Electoral College. And the thing to keep in mind here is Donald Trump in the past couple of weeks has already been talking about, well, maybe on day one, Insurrection Act. And it's not hard to imagine, in the wake of what happened in 2016, you had 1 million people marching before the inauguration, right? The idea that Donald Trump could become president and lose the popular vote by 5, 6, 7, 8 million votes, with the awareness that he's got pending criminal and civil trials against him, and the idea that people would then come out and protest, and the idea that he would then say, we're gonna invoke the Insurrection Act. And here's the example why. I mean, these are not fantastical things. Donald Trump was bandying this stuff around in the first term, and he had to worry about a second term. And he had an administration that was full of people who were there ostensibly to sort of help him tap the brakes on his, you're not going to have that same type of crew next time.
Reince Priebus was his, came in on day one, and there was a real effort to try to normalize him and make and rein in some of his worst instincts. And like, as you've said, he could maybe just be a warm body that signs into law all of the extreme, pro-industry, pro-wealthy people, agenda items for the Republican Party. But like, it became something different, obviously, towards the end. And there was so much turnover that now it's just going to be whoever Steve Bannon wants. They've already put out that plan that they're going to immediately on day one stack the administrative state with pro-Trump cronies. The lesson he's going to take from this if he wins again is I'm not going to waste time, and I'm not going to listen to the people who's told me to slow down because look what happened. They stole it from me anyway.
If you go back to like 2019 and 2020, there was a real sense, I specifically remember, talking about this, that Trump really had a sense of like, oh, wait a second. I've got more power than I thought I had.
Right.
And I can do stuff. And certainly, look what he tried to do with the election. So I think as we get closer to the election, this is going to become clearer. The only bright spot for Biden in this polling is that the sense of the economy that people have is improved. Economy is mentioned, top issue mentioned by 18 to 29-year-olds, 84%. Inflation, 39%. Personal finances, 38%. Foreign policy, 34% in that 18 to 29 age bracket. And there is a slight uptick in people's perspective of the economy, which is, going to be good for Biden if it continues. There's reason to believe that there's going to be, the Fed's going to cut rates in 2024, which should start to make the opportunity, to buy new homes, starter homes, to leave your homes a little bit easier to people, which theoretically could, lower rents a little bit. But prices are still high for people, particularly relative to wages, in the middle of the sort of economic spectrum. Low wage workers are doing better from a statistical standpoint than they were prior to 2020. But in the middle there, inflation has beaten out wages. So,
and let's also say too, housing is
crazy. Both, in terms of like the rise in interest rates is actually sort of like, I think, increased prices in most areas because there's no inventory.
Yeah.
And rents are through the roof, and we just need more housing in this country.